So it's 1:04. I think we can get started. Just to make sure we're all on the right plane. This is a YouthReach information session for our YouthReach grant. It opened, the application became available yesterday, and it is open through December 16th. So we'll talk through all those guidelines. We're going to give you kind of a broad overview of the agency's work in creative youth development, eligibility for the program, some of the review criteria and steps of the program, including logic models and site visits, and then some information about the panel. This is the best chance to ask questions that pop into your mind, even if they're specific to your organization, because chances are there's others in the room who may have similar questions. We're going to offer a follow-up. You know, the Mass Cultural Council staff will explain our role in a little bit, but we're here to support you through this whole process between now and December 16th, and panels in June. So we'll likely be in touch with each of you individually, and we'll also talk about Julia Gilman, who's joined us today, who's offering office hours for anyone who wants to apply to YouthReach. You have free consulting time. So we'll cover a lot today, and we'll have plenty of time to digest that as we keep going. First, we just want to introduce ourselves. I'm Eric Holmgren from the Mass Cultural Council, working here in Creative Youth Development with my colleague, Keita.
Yep, and I'm Keita Swabak, Program Officer for Creative Youth Development and also Culture RX, and so good to be joining you today. And is Amy here?
I don't think so yet. So let's jump in. Keita.
That's me. So what is creative youth development? There's many different definitions out there, but one of them is that creative youth development is a term for a long-standing practice that integrates creative skill building, inquiry, and expression with positive youth development principles, fueling young people's imaginations and building critical learning and life skills. So many of you may know that YouthReach was started in 1994, and this was through a response to an NEA grant opportunity. And this has been a program that has been run continuously since that time. And just because we have her in the room, all of us are here today because Ann Teschner was the one who actually started it. So thank you, Ann, many, many years ago. All right, and next. So we have we've grown particularly in the past 10 years, where you can see that our support for CYD has increased from 1 program to 5. And then we now offer support field-wide in YouthReach and in the music program Sarah. So we have also field-wide support for teaching artists, both in the music educator and teaching artist fellowship. That's what META stands for. And the CYD Teaching Artist Fellowship. And this is thanks in partnership to the Klarman Family Foundation, and also Lindy Foundation, who are partnering on that project. And we do this in order to strengthen opportunities and support for teaching artists. And then we have the young people and the CYD BIPOC Alumni Council, which I will talk about a little bit more further on. And I'll put in the chat some of these links if you want to find out more about them. But our field-wide support is both for our local and national partnerships. And this includes Youth Arts Impact Network, put that website in there as well. And also the Yane CYD Impact Task Force, which we're really excited to just begin. Our first meeting will be on November 1st. And this involves 6 different advisors in really trying to dial down to what does this really mean to have impact and indicators and outcomes for CYD. And we have our National Convene series with one that's going to be offered just this next Thursday on October 28th. I'll put that in the chat. And then also the national partnerships, where a lot of this has stemmed from. And we'll talk about that further too. Next slide. All right, so creative youth development. Many of you are probably familiar with these 6 principles. This has been part of Mass Cultural Council's youth development, creative youth development for quite a while. So provide safe and healthy youth spaces, also known as brave spaces for young people, are asset-based, foster the development of positive relationships and social skills, are youth-driven, set high expectations for growth and learning, and address the broader context in which creative youth development operates. So 2022 will be the 28th anniversary of this program, with the most recent redesigns, and we call them Kazans, of the program that came in 2011 and then in 2019. And this is where we really decided, okay, how can we even better champion creative youth development programs as spaces in which young people can develop not only their self-identities, but also recognize liberating and oppressive forces and activate these programs' potential for impact. Next slide. And I love this little slide because it starts to really make clear, what do we mean when we talk about wanting to center youth voice? So Pierre talks about there's no student who learns and a teacher who educates, but a shared power relationship where both who are taught also teach. So this really tries to address, this diagram tries to address how we address how power flows between youth and adults. And this ladder shows how we can all get better in not just having youth included, but as true, insightful participants, crafting new shared leadership models where truly shared decision and decision making is really prioritized. So you can sort of see we want to go up those rungs so that we can be operating more towards that very top. All right, and Eric, I think it's your turn.
So the young people in creative youth development, we had roughly 9,000 in 2019, and those numbers dipped by a little over 10% during the pandemic. But they're represented here. Young people in creative youth development programs have historically been significantly more diverse than the general population of Massachusetts. These numbers have shifted over time. But this is where we currently are. We hope that those numbers will rebound a little bit as well as we find our way back to some sense of normalcy. One of the things that's interesting about creative youth development and the Mass Cultural Council support for it is that it overlaps significantly with the work of other public agencies in health and human services. In particular, the Department of Youth Services, which are juvenile justice involved youth, Department of Children and Families, and the Department of Mental Health. A couple numbers that stick out here: youth with disabilities are 20%, 1 in 5 of all of the young people who are involved in YouthReach, and 29% live in homes where English is not spoken. 54% live in economically depressed urban environments, and only 5% in rural environments. That's not a reflection of the number of programs that we support in rural environments. It's just that those programs tend to be smaller in terms of participants than some of our programs that are centered in cities. The YouthReach program, as Keita said, has been around more than 25 years and was started with the out-of-school time sector in mind to integrate substantive out-of-school arts, humanities, and science opportunities into a collaborative community response into the needs of young people. That collaborative community response is really key here. We're going to bring this theme up a number of times as we talk through the guidelines, and it really boils down to the idea that it takes a village to do this work. There's no one organization that can serve all of the needs of young people and communities alone. These programs often operate in partnership within their communities and across the state. And so that's something we'll talk about quite a bit when we get to the guidelines. So YouthReach has existed alongside a program called Sarah Sarah since 2014. In 2014, Mass Cultural Council launched Sarah Sarah as the first public support system for El Sistema inspired work in the United States. Over the last 7 years, we've used the exact same guidelines and review process, same grant amounts as YouthReach. The two programs have really operated in parallel, because one of the things that became clear is that El Sistema inspired work at its core is essentially youth development through ensemble music making. And so this year we are merging those two under one banner. So there really are no substantive changes to the support for Sarah Sarah organizations. The grant amounts are going to stay the same. We're just putting them under one banner, and this will be the first time. So for those of you who have applied to Sarah Sarah in the past, you'll find your application and materials under the name YouthReach this year. Keita.
Sorry, I had to find that mute. So you've heard about the definition, but now what we really want to talk about is the values. The values of creative youth development is really about young people's stories, ideas, and dreams that are shared through creative expression and really by honoring their lived experiences. So the three that really came out of, especially the 2014 convening and the national blueprint that was authored, were these three. How do you really center youth voices as a distinct value? How do you create that value and unearth that value of racial equity and social justice, and really also put intention towards collective action? So next slide. One of the ways that we are trying to do this also through the council is that we've had these 9 members here that were chosen from YouthReach grantees for a 5-month pilot. And these alumni, ages 18 to 24, applied, and were leaders really wrestling these CYD goals of creative expression, the youth leadership, social and racial justice, and collective action. And this spring, they worked with Yane and the city of Boston in virtual forums. They led CYD calls and participated in also national forums. And then as well as a few of your groups even got interviewed as part of a survey they did with young people. So we're going to be continuing this year with 3 alums who will plan for FY23's robust alumni council. And the reason why we want to mention this is that these are just initiatives that a lot of you may have known about the Amplify project that we did for about 4 years. This is sort of a different version of it because we really wanted to cater to our needs of our alumni who, eventually could be in these leadership and positions of power within our CYD organizations, but not until we really, really hear from them about the things that might need to change for that truly to be possible. So next. So as I mentioned, as part of the 2018 National CYD Blueprint, a task force was developed to really further research and devise outcome areas that matched with the complex work of CYD. And what emerged was what we affectionately called Create, Connect, and Catalyze framework, which we will get into a bit more after we break for questions.
So we're going to do this thing where we pause on a large Zoom and ask questions, and absolutely no one jumps into that space. It's just awkwardly silent for a while, but we're going to give that space anyway. We're going to have a couple of these pauses as we go, and then at the end, a lot of questions will come out. But just up front, are there any questions about the sort of shape and frame of what creative youth development is, or how it may relate to your programs? And there's that awkward silence. So we'll keep moving.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be talking further about the portal and how do we get in that. So I think, Sarah, your question will be answered then.
Yep. YouthReach grants are currently at $22,000 per year for 3 years. The next cycle is taking place this fall. We're actually in the 4th year of the current cycle. We extended it by 1 year for COVID. The other important point here is there's no matching requirement for YouthReach grants any longer. We had that requirement in various phases of YouthReach at different amounts. And again, YouthReach has grown from $10,000 a year grants in 2014 to $22,000 a year grants this year. There's a lot of different organization sizes in the cohort, very small organizations to large, and that matching requirement is just something we wanted to remove. The application itself opened yesterday and is due on December 16th of this year. And then after that, we'll talk through this a little later. We visit every program that applied, either virtually or in person. Panels meet in June. It's a long process. The grant, as we go through all of this, we promise it's worth your time because we won't bother you for this information again for 3 years. The grant year is this year, and it provides funding beginning July 1st, 2022. And continues to support successful programs through June 30th, 2025, pending the completion of final reports each year. All awards are contingent upon the Mass Cultural Council's allocation and receipt of sufficient funds from the legislature and from the NEA. We've been very fortunate over the last few years that our budget has gone up significantly, and so have the YouthReach grants. We've not been in a position in the recent past that we've ever had to lower these grants. So we hope that this will be the baseline. The grants will continue to increase, but we won't have that information until, each year when the governor signs the budget into law. So we'll always stay in touch with a lot of advocacy information because the more money that comes to the Mass Cultural Council, the more goes out. So we're going to talk through eligibility in two ways. One is the applicant eligibility, and then two is the program eligibility. YouthReach, it's important to note, YouthReach is a programmatic support program. It provides what's essentially unrestricted programmatic operating support. It's not an organizational support program. We have organizational support programs at the Mass Cultural Council through the Cultural Investment Portfolio, which I know many organizations are already a part of. So we'll focus more specifically on the programs. To be an eligible applicant, you need to be a Massachusetts 501c3, or you can be a K-12 school, but only for ensemble-based music programs. So this is part of the integration of Sarah Sayre. The Elsa STEM-inspired work happened in school, and so we're going to continue to allow in-school programming if ensemble music is the main vehicle for learning. And we'll see if, what the role of schools are in the future of YouthReach, but for now, we're limiting it there. Programs of the state or federal government in Massachusetts are eligible, Massachusetts public colleges and universities, and also applicants using a fiscal agent, which helps for project-based programs and organizations that are either beginning to grow or are, really function best as a community-based organization. So if there are specific eligibility questions, we can talk more about those in the question section or offline, because there are some really specific different kinds of models. When YouthReach was started, there was a really clear distinction in 1994 between out of school time and in school time. And that space has blurred significantly over the last 28 years. And so we're adapting to that and still looking at what the future of the program looks like with that in mind. For a program to be eligible for YouthReach, the proposed youth programming must be primarily in the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences. There's always questions about the definition of interpretive sciences, so we can talk about that a bit. Proposed programs must take place after school or out of school, except for those ensemble-based music programs. So a large number of programs take place in the after-school hours. We do allow out of school time or out of school programming. So we've had examples of students who actually go from a school or some other sort of educational environment out to an organization during the day and then come back. Those programs are still eligible. There's not a lot of them, but again, that space is a little bit blurry. K-12 school applicants can only submit applications for those ensemble-based music programs. And should see themselves in the definition below. Again, this is creative youth development's an interesting field because a lot of the outcomes, the youth development outcomes that we talk about are the hopes of all arts education programs. We always hope that students will grow in these ways. Creative youth development has intentional practices in place and measurements in place to understand and promote that youth development component. And I think that's usually the key differentiator between a lot of arts education programs and creative youth development programs. So again, guidelines were available as of yesterday afternoon. The application is due on December 16th and site visits are scheduled between January and May 2022. Panels take place in June 2022. The panelists make recommendations to our council, who actually can't meet until after the governor signs his budget into law, which is supposed to be on July 1, but usually doesn't happen on July 1. So that meeting is conservatively scheduled for August. So notifications actually won't be sent to successful applicants until August. So this is a year-long process. Again, the cycle is for 3 years. You won't have to deal with it outside of that. A couple of notes about that timeline. Our panels are composed of experts in the field. So they're practitioners, they're executive directors. We bring in alums, sometimes teaching artists. They're folks who understand not just the work of creative youth development, but the work of creative youth development in the current environment of COVID, of programs having to adapt models and new practices. So they'll be familiar with the experiences of what's going on. Keita, myself, and our colleague Amy Chu, we do not matter. Not in life, but just in this grant program. We do not make funding decisions or funding recommendations. We develop the guidelines, we assemble the panels, we facilitate the panels, but the panelists are the one who score all of the applications, and the panel makes funding recommendations to our council. and our council ultimately approves those. So Keita and I, our role, and Amy, is to help you put forward your best application and work with you throughout the application period and during the site visit period to make sure you're telling your story in the ways that you want to be able to tell your story, and that your application is as strong as it can be. We have 3 categories of grantees. We have new applicants, we have returning applicants, and we have partners. We'll start with partners. Partners are programs that have been funded for 9 or more years. They do not have to apply to this program. Once you've been funded for 9 years, all you're required to do as a partner is to submit final reports. And that stays in place, that partner designation stays in place so long as final reports are submitted and there are no major changes. If there are significant changes to your programming after that 9 years, it's usually just a conversation to help us understand it. Occasionally we have to bring it to our council, but it's a way to just sustain funding for programs who have been thoroughly vetted and don't need to worry about this grant among all the other grants that support this work. Returning applicants are applicants who are currently funded by the YouthReach or Sarah Grant program. So if you are currently receiving a grant, you are a returning applicant. New applicants are applicants who are not currently receiving a YouthReach or Sarah grant. You may be an applicant to our CIP program or to other programs at the Mass Cultural Council. That's fine, but if you are not a YouthReach grantee, then you fall into that new category. Any questions about the program itself or about grant eligibility? And again, specific questions are more than welcome because they may be more broadly applicable than you think. Awkward Zoom silence number 2. We'll keep moving. As we mentioned at the top, we do have a new grants management system. It is brand new for the Mass Cultural Council. Our last system was very old. It's going to be tricky. The link to that system is on this page. Again, we'll share this. You'll find it all over the Mass Cultural Council's webpage. For those of you who have applied to programs in the past, or returning and YouthReach partners, your applications are already in the system. You've been moved over. However, you'll need to generate a new password. For returning applicants, we sent out an email yesterday afternoon that provided instructions for how to access each of those, your application. For returning applicants, you'll also need a 5-digit code that was included in that email. That email was sent to the primary grant contacts on each grant application. So that's often the executive directors. If you didn't receive it yesterday or haven't received it internally, let us know and we can forward a copy of that. That 5-digit code is part of the way that you can get access to the grant program. Again, every person that logs into the system is a user. Your email address is always your ID. Once you log in and complete this application, the account that was used to complete the application will be the account the application's associated with over the next 3 years. So that means final reports each year, even 2 or 3 years down the road. We know people move jobs all the time. So, you know, that can be shared internally, or there's ways you can transfer that ownership through different email addresses, but we really let organizations take the lead on managing, you know, who has access and when. The best part is you have a help desk, and that help desk is not me or Keita or Amy. It is someone who does this all the time. Her name's Evelyn Nellam. She's dealing with questions for all of our grant programs. She knows the system very well. So if you're having trouble accessing the application or having any trouble with the grant system, Evelyn is your person. She gets emails from the address that's on the screen. Keita and Amy and I will help you with any sort of program related information, but for grant related information or for system information, Evelyn is your person. Start this process as early as you can. We're all here today. We're, you know, almost 2 months out. It's a significant application. We'd love to say that it's really easy. We've tried to streamline it. It should be things that are familiar to you. It shouldn't be a stretch necessarily for some of the work you do. But it takes a while, and our grant system may cause another layer. So start your application early, be in touch with the help desk or be in touch with us along the way. And again, we've got several months to help you put together a great application. So our review criteria, we're going to walk through each of the guidelines. These guidelines are posted on our website. The guidelines are the exact same guidelines that panelists use to score your application. When they look at your application in our system and do the scoring, they will have a split screen. And on one side will be the guidelines, and on the other side will be the scoring form that's based on exactly what you see here. So everyone has access to the same kinds of information all the way through. When we ask panelists to score, we're not asking them to give their opinion of the program, of whether parts of it are good or bad, or the organization's good or bad. We only ask them to score the applications in relation to these guidelines. We don't bring in any other information. So again, these guidelines are really a foundation for the way that we run a process, and they're the foundation for it being a transparent process so that applicants have access to the same things panelists do, all the way through to our panel, which is a public panel. We allow folks to call in and listen to the panel deliberations so they know what's being said about their organizations. And it's also a really great professional development opportunity to hear a group of people respond to the kinds of ways that you're describing your organization and the experiences with the organization. They're divided into 5 areas: community need and participation, youth voice and community engagement. The quality of the program design is the largest, most important category, and probably the one you'll spend the most time on. It utilizes a framework that Kate described earlier, and we'll return to. Program evaluation is really important so that you have a solid understanding of how your program is meeting the needs you've described and how to improve it. And again, Julia Gittleman, who's on this call, is working with us as a consultant. We'll work with each of your organizations at no cost to help understand some of those evaluation metrics and different evaluation metrics that are currently being used by other creative youth development programs. The final piece here is fiscal management. Again, this is a programmatic operating support program, not an organizational support program. So we're not going to be looking at your entire organization's budget and how that works. We're going to be looking only at the program's budget to make sure that it aligns with the program design and is sustainable over the 3-year grant period. Logic models. Kate, do you want to take this one?
Oh, sorry. Sure. So logic models, we love logic models, sort of. I mean, they're hard and they're complicated, and life is a lot more complicated than a typical logic model will show. But the reason why we love them so much is it really helps us clarify and simplify exactly what it is that you are trying to do. Or Julia and I both love the phrase of value what you measure so that others, measure what you value so that others can value what you measure. And that's what logic models are about, is really defining what is it that you want to be looking for in terms of analyzing your own impact. So this link that is provided there and that I also provided into in the chat, it gives you a sample of a logic model that we like, that we encourage you to use, although that's not the only template you can use. If there's something that you love that you've been using, been working well for you, great. But overall, the logic model is really comprised of aspects like your mission, your target population, your assumptions, strategies, your activities, your outputs, short and intermediate outcomes, and if you can think far enough down that road, what is it ultimately that you want to be achieving in those long-term outcomes? Eric, is that you?
Sorry, I had a problem with my mute button. So we're going to talk through each of the different criteria as we go through. Again, all of this information is in the guidelines. It's actually a little more robust than this. We moved it down again. We're going through each of these because each bullet in each area of this is drawn from effective practices in creative youth development over the last 30 years. Really close work with organizations and with our colleagues around the country to really help define these effective practices. This application is basically built on those. So it's a way to think through your own programs as you're crafting the application. It's not necessary that absolutely every single thing here is going to apply to your program, but it helps panelists have a frame for looking across all of the applicants for the program. So our first area is community need and participation. And this category is really about a documented need, which is the foundation for a lot of the rest of the application. It documents that youth face personal or systemic challenges, and that the program evolved from discussions with young people in the community. When you're looking at your logic models and thinking about your program, that need is what the program design is about meeting, and then your evaluation is about how well you're meeting that need. So panelists will really look at this to understand why this program exists, and then throughout the rest of the application review, how the program is meeting that specific need. Youth voice and community engagement is our second piece. Again, youth voice is one of the key components of creative youth development. Panelists will be looking for evidence that the voice of young people and their input is valued, that the program helps youth feel seen and heard. The organization actively works to enhance the leadership of youth and alumni, that youth learn to effectively critique their own work, and they gain skills in advocating for their needs and in community needs. So these programs are built with young people and not for young people. The community engagement goes back to that idea that it takes a village to do this work, that the project coordinates with other youth serving cultural and community organizations, and that current youth alumni and families provide input. This is a little bit different in a school setting, because in a school setting, often those partners that are present in the nonprofit sector, they can be under one roof in a school. So for ensemble-based music programs, there's coordination within that school, and then often externally with community partners as well. The quality of the program design. Keita, do you want to talk us through this?
Sure. So 10 points of this 40 points will be about leadership, and this leadership is about the evidence of the effective leadership of instructional staff and excellence in the design of the curriculum. Part of what we'll be asking for is just kind of like bios of your key staff, and then curriculum, and we put that kind of in quotes because we understand that, especially if you're a youth-centered organization, there's stuff that will be evolving just in real time as things develop in the world and in response to the world. So, you know, part of that curriculum could even just be about those key questions that you are asking every month, or as a way to really tap into what the Here and Now is offering. But that is kind of the main point, is to give a scope and the sequence, the structure kind of your program. And yeah, that's 10 points. So the next one, go to the next slide. So I'll put this in the chat as well, but this kind of gives you a brief overview of the Create, Connect, and Catalyze framework that we mentioned kind of came about in, I think, 2020 is when it really came forward. So Create is all about, basically, as a result of this program, how will you know that the young people excel in the discipline and or techniques that you are teaching, but then also just in their own ability to be seen as an artist or dancer or a scientist in a creative humanities. You know, what does that really look like, the skills that they are developing as they are trying to express their voice in creative ways. And then we have Connect, and Connect really is about, as a result of this program, you know, how will you know that young people can discover who they are and express their identity as they form positive relationships and meaningful relationships with adults, peers, and their community. And basically, you know, they're answering that, who am I and where do I really belong in this whole thing? And Catalyze is about, you know, what opportunities do you offer young people as they progress? Are there culminating events that may help give them an opportunity to be seen and valued in their community? And then basically, in all of this, how will your program help young people to find and use their voice, join with other voices, and really in order to activate change in their own lives and in their communities?
So when we get to program evaluation, Keita, do you just want to introduce Julia so we stop talking about her?
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the amazing Julia Gilman. She is a familiar name to, I'm sure, many of you. And we've been working together for, boy, at least, 15 years. Julia, would you like to mention something about the Youth Arts Impact Network and your role in it and what we're doing this year?
Sure. And I'm just happy to be here and see everybody, and happy to offer my services in support of your YouthReach applications. I'm really excited to get to work with Eric and Kata in the YouthReach proposals, and specifically in this section, the program evaluation. I should be your best friend. So if you don't have a logic model and are interested in creating one because it's a requirement of this grant, or you have one and you want to update it, you should email me, and I'm sure that Kata will drop that in the box at some point, in the chat box. But we worked long and hard to create as simple a logic model format as possible. I'm a big proponent of these because I think they help people to clarify really what they're trying to measure and do it in a realistic, time efficient, but action-oriented way. So, and Kata and I and Eric have all worked very closely together around the creation and support for the Youth Arts Impact Network and the website that Kata also put in the chat, which has lots of examples and resources that I'm happy to direct you towards and help you to emulate. Because there's no reason to recreate the wheel if there are good examples out there of way you could measure the way that your program is set up. So we will talk more about this individually as you reach out to me, but I'm here and happy to serve as a resource.
Excellent. So yeah, where are we? Okay, criteria. Yes, the program evaluation. You know, as you are asking yourselves about your own organization and talking to Julia in her office hours, you're going to help to really designate like what the goals of your program are. What are the indicators that will really help you to determine the success of your goals, and how really will you track this? This is not easy. We understand that. We've been at this a very long time trying to figure this out. So just so you know, you're not alone in this, and we're here to help. Second thing is, you know, how might young people really participate in charting, monitoring, or analyzing their own progress? Because remember, they are the experts of themselves and of the program because they're living it. So we really want to make sure that organizations are asking them about what they do and how to do it better. And then finally, you know, how will you use your findings, or how have you used your findings to help staff as well as your young people understand the experience of youth and how you have used them to how you have incorporated their voice in improving your own program. And then last, you know, what resources, which includes like database systems, have you invested in to create and manage these evaluations and assessment systems? Because we understand it takes time, it takes money, and we also are curious in terms of, you know, what barriers are you facing? Because that's the other project Julia and I have been on for a very long time, but is how can we really develop a shared database, or a database in which each organization can tailor so that this isn't so gosh darn hard all the time and everybody's not reinventing how to do this. All right, next. Eric, I think that's you.
Yeah, so for our fiscal management, it's 10 points, and panelists are really looking for the soundness of the fiscal management and diversity and reliability of financial support. So they want to make sure that the program and the organization have the capacity to successfully implement the program during a 3-year period, that the income and expenses align with the proposed activities in the program design, and that the funding is sufficiently diverse. We don't typically act as a sole funder in these programs. We're also part of a funding community that supports them. And again, it's not a huge part, but those 10 points do matter in the overall review of the application. We are not requiring a match at this time, which was a lot of work for organizations and for us in terms of reviewing final reports and looking at expenses. And it's not really what the purpose of this grant is at this time. So we let that go. Does anyone else have questions about the review criteria and all of that information that we just threw your way?
Eric, there were a bunch of questions in the chat. And,
okay.
Sorry, I got buried here. All right, so can I just quick run through them?
Yep.
Maya was wondering about, so the funding for this year will begin on July 1st, 2022, but decisions are sent out in August 2022?
Correct. It is not ideal. It is not ideal because of the budget process of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So the programs that we're supporting, you can utilize the funding to cover expenses beginning July 1, 2022 through June 30th. The funding actually won't arrive until likely October. The budget is signed into law, hopefully around July 1st. Our council meets in mid-August and approves all of the grants really for that entire year. And then our fiscal team goes into a deep, dark hole and generates contracts for more than 400 grants and gets them out as fast as they can, beginning right there in September. So it can often take until October. We do think that the new grant system will accelerate that. So once the contract is signed and returned by snail mail to our office, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts still requires wet signatures on contracts, but we've heard some rumors that may be going away. Once we've received that contract, after that time, the payment is made. That will be approximately the time frame each year over those 3 years, because the budget process will theoretically repeat on that same time schedule. When we got into COVID, obviously that was an extraordinary circumstance. The budget actually wasn't approved until January, and that funding wasn't released until January or February rather than October. I just say that because it is a possibility that the state budget system could get backed up, and what they do is pass 30-day budgets, so month by month, and we can't make those grants until the full annual budget's been passed. So it's been fairly stable with the exception of that time. If the program begins prior to July 1st, that's also fine. The grant can only cover expenses incurred after July 1st, 2022.
There's another couple questions. We're going to put our email addresses in the chat too. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. But in terms of them figuring out if they're a partner or returning applicant, and also some questions around, where did this email go for returning applicants? Because some organizations said they didn't get it. So it was mainly mailed to the grant contact from the previous application, as well as the ED, correct?
Yep, and I've been in touch with direct message with most of those folks. April Crowley, I couldn't see which organization you were from. Are you still there, April? So we can follow up separately. Double Edge Theater. That email would not have gone to Double Edge Theater because you're not currently a grantee. That email went out to returning grantees who need a specific code to access the instructions, to access the application. New applicants can access the application now. They log in, create the account, and they should be able to have that application visible. Bithy is asking a question about the program focus for returning applicants versus new. The application is essentially the same. The new applicants we put together in a panel. So all new applicants are paneled together and returning applicants are paneled together. And the reason we do that is that we want to make sure that new applicants have an opportunity to enter this cohort. In 2014, we had 39 organizations that we supported, 39 CYD programs. Now we have 73. So we've been able to continually grow that. At the same time, we've increased the grant pool. That's an important role for the Mass Cultural Council to play. We're probably not the biggest funder, but we are a broad funder. And in the off-cycle grant years, so in the years we're not doing grant cycles, we will be bringing in a lot of resources for this community to help develop the program. There's not a preference for continuing versus new. We take a look at them and then the available funds. So we won't know how many programs we can fund until we get our budget for next year. Once we have a dollar amount for this program, then we can make decisions of how many new organizations we get into the cohort and how many returning.
Hi, thank you. Eric, may I ask a question? Sorry, I think I don't think I'm phrasing it right in the chat. My question is for returning applicants, the program that we focus our proposal on. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you can speak to as far as our current proposal in comparison to our original proposal, the program that we proposed for originally, or is there any preference that way as far as, do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
The panelists will not look at anything other than the application that's presented to them this year. Okay. So they won't be reflecting on an application from 3 years prior. So all of the decisions are made based on the criteria that we just described, and then the site visit that we're going to describe in a minute. So there's no concern about past applications.
All right, thank you.
And then just really quick, we should be able to have this PDF and the recording of the presentation available like by next week. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, it should be relatively quick. We can follow up with this. We just want to make sure the recording is accessible through our system before we send it out, but we'll get it out quickly so everybody has this material. And again, what we did for this presentation is largely just lift information from our guidelines, which are on the website. This is really an opportunity to ask specific questions about them, but those guidelines will be available until December 16th.
And then last brief question, with our new grant system, I do believe that there is that opportunity that once you have logged in and you're accessing the application, you can save it as a draft. So you have all of those questions there. So that way, if you want to share with your other staff members, or if you want to divvy it out to different people, like you'll be able to do that by saving it as a draft. And
right, and do it offline. Yep. And yes, you please share this presentation with community partners, share the slides. We want to make sure that this gets out as broadly as possible. We always want to develop our applicant pool in the hopes that we can leverage that with the legislature to say we're not meeting the entire need here in Massachusetts. We need more funding to do this, and we want to make sure we are funding programs in all of the areas of the Commonwealth. We're particularly light on programs in the South Coast. We have one in New Bedford, nothing in Fall River, Brockton, Plymouth, and
I think I'm muted.
We're missing a few other.
No, I'm talking. I'm on a. Let me go in another.
There we go. It'll be helpful if we get the broadest applicant pool possible. Any other questions? All right, we will press on for now, and then we'll have some more time at the end. Interviews and site visits are really one of the key pieces of the YouthReach application cycle. There's 3 ways to tell your story in this application. One is through the logic model. One is through the narrative application, the written application, and the third is through the site visit or the interview. We have taken the time in the past to visit every single program that applies with a panelist. And when the panelist visits, that panelist is the lead reviewer on your application. So when they come into the panel, what will happen is Kate or Amy and I will turn and ask that person to walk us through the application and their experience. 90% of the conversation in the panel is about the site visit and about what the site visitor learned in that visit. All of the panelists have access to and score each application. It's the site visit or the interview that really adds some context to it and supports the things in the application. The purpose of it is to make sure that panelists can connect with the key players, the location, the community, and have a lot more of a context to it. The Mass Cultural Council will be in touch with each program ahead of their site visit. We have some requirements for the site visit, meeting with youth, meeting with leadership, but we leave the agenda setting to the organization. How organizations tell their story can be as important as what that story is. So we've had everything from, minute by minute rundowns where panelists are meeting key players all along the way to walking into a room full of young people and having the executive director say, I'll leave you to it. Let us know if you need anything, and leaving the room. And the entire site visit is led by youth. So, those visits are variable. We'll be here to help you shape them. We do not know at this point if those visits are going to be in person or if they're going to be virtual in interviews. We're going to make a decision about that likely in December based on the public health situation. Whatever that decision will be, it'll be consistent among panels. So, if all the new applications will get either a visit or an interview, they won't be mixed so that everyone is on a level playing field. In the interviews or the site visits, the panelist is there to talk to senior staff and key staff from the organization, talk to somebody in a caretaking position, outside of the program, staff, parents, caseworkers, key stakeholders. We often find partners in these visits, talking with teaching artists or folks who work directly with young people, and then ideally to talk with young people as well. We get a lot of questions about what if a program is not running yet? Or doesn't have young people yet, or it's a program in planning. Those programs are eligible to apply, and we encourage them to apply. In the case that there's not an operational program, there's still a number of the things in this list that can happen. you still can talk to folks from the organization or folks involved directly working with young people or young people from that community, or maybe a young person who works with an organization, and this is a new program at an organization. We take whatever we can get. I think we think about the site visit as really additive to the application. So even if something's not up and running, it's totally fine, and it adds value to your application. Interviews and site visits will be similar. Again, there'll be a panelist who's the primary person for each visit. Mass Cultural Council staff actually goes on all of these visits as well. Sometimes we step away. It's important that the conversation is really between the organization and the panelists, because again, Keita, Amy, and I, we do not matter. We like to facilitate things and make sure everyone's clear and get off to a good start. And then we may step away at certain points. On one particular site visit, I had to step away because they were dissecting animals and I just couldn't handle it. But our panelists stuck it out. So those will let you know everything you need to know ahead of those visits, including who your panelist is. The logic models, as we talked about, we're going to be offering a logic model webinar sometime between now and December that gives you sort of an outline for how to craft one. Everyone, again, will have access to Julia Gittleman, and then the Youth Arts Impact website, which is actually not listed here, but we'll send that along, has examples of logic models from other organizations, from other creative youth development organizations from around Massachusetts. It's a tremendous resource to get started and to kind of take a look at how these things work. For many panelists, these are almost like a table of contents for your application. You're able to see the need, you're able to see the program design and how it meets that need, and you're able to see the evaluation of how well you're meeting that need. And then the application provides a deeper dive. The site visit provides some human context around that. So again, we'll do everything we can to support you. We'll also have happy to review these as you're drafting your application. If you'd like us to take a look at either your application or a logic model, you can be in touch with Keita, Amy, or I, and we'll take a look at your drafts and send you some feedback before they go in. The panels themselves will be held in June 2022. They are public, so it means applicants can call in and listen. We usually send out a timesheet so that each organization knows approximately when their application is going to be discussed, rather than just sit there and listen for 8 hours. They're long days. We'll announce what those panel dates are, and you'll have all that information ahead of time. Panelists, again, they're remarkable folks who have been invested deeply in this work over a long period of time, whether they're teaching artists, whether they're organizational leadership, program leadership. There's something that my colleague Diane Daly refers to as panel magic. These folks understand what goes into great work in these areas, and they really do tremendous work, doing a lot of reading, first of all, but second, to really get at the heart of what a great program is rather than just what a great application is. And we do that through the site visit as well, but we'll make sure everyone's aware too of who is on the panel and then who their site visitor will be, who will ultimately be the lead reviewer for that application. Again, most of the conversation in the panel is about site visits, and all of the decisions in the conversation are not about a program being good or bad, but are about how the program relates to the guidelines. That's really where we stick. After the panel is done, the scores are tallied and recommendations are then made to our council, who meets to approve them in August, thus ending a very long process at government speed for a grant, but we'll be here to support you all along the way. Our email addresses are there in the corner, Eric, Keita, Amy, and I. So again, we're your contacts through this whole process, and happy to help in whatever ways we can. I'm tired of talking. You all must be tired of listening. This is a moment we have together here for any questions that you may have about your application, about any of the review criteria, the process, how to access the grant cycle in the application. April just asked if we could post a help desk. We'll definitely do that. Sharon's question about how many grants will be awarded. Again, we currently fund 73. We won't know the specific answer until after we receive our budget. We hope that number grows. In the last cycle, typically in the returning panels, returning applicants have historically been highly successful. There are instances where 1 or 2 or 3 organizations have not been renewed for a second cycle, but that's 1 or 2 or 3 out of about 34 or 35. So maybe about 10%. It's not always the case. Every panel is different. It just kind of always works that way. With the new applicants, again, it depends on the eligible funding. That's really where, if we have the funding, we want to expand this program. Somewhere around 50% have typically been funded. 7 years ago, we had 29 new applicants. Last cycle, we had 32 new applicants, and I think we ended up funding an additional 13 or 14. So we're hoping to continue to expand the program. And again, our role in the philanthropic community is to be a sustainable funder, so long as, you know, organizations are successful in the panel.
And Eric, there was a quick question in the chat up there about, you know, what if they have like a robust summer program that they're really wanting to apply for, you know, and because site visits usually are happening in the winter and spring. The question was, you know, is there a preference for programs that are not summer only? And I think that would be no, because sometimes incredibly great, robust summer programs are there. But how would you answer that one in terms of the site visit?
Yeah, so historically, summer-only programs have not been successful in this grant program. And the reason for that is that youth development is something that takes sustained engagement over time with young people. That's not to say summer programs aren't incredible and do great work. It's just to say that panelists, when reviewing these, have not typically recommended them for funding at the same rate as year-long programs. So in the case of a specific summer-only program, it's worth a conversation to be in touch with us, because we can be sort of supports for understanding not just if your program is eligible, but if it's competitive. So that's a conversation we'd love to have offline if you want to reach out.
And I would imagine, especially if there was a somewhat of a component in the year that helps Youth Voice maybe build this summer program, or, you know, that there's a continuation so that those relationships get developed over time.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Any other questions? How early is the site visit scheduled? So the way we go through site visits, your applications are due on December 16th. We wait until after that time to schedule site visits, because we want panelists to have the application before they go on the visit, so they've got some information about the program. We'll give you a month's heads up as of December 16th about whether or not those visits will be in person or virtual. And then we'll start scheduling them. And at that point, they're scheduled based on availability. So they won't start until January. We'll start the scheduling process, if we can, in December before the holidays. That scheduling realistically will probably roll on into January. So you'll be able to lock that site visit in advance. Once we have specific dates that organizations are available for site visits, we then put those dates for panelists to align their schedule so that they can go. Once those two things are locked in, we confirm your visit and start working on the agenda. So we'll make sure that you have plenty of time. There's not a scenario where all of that will line up and we'll be at your organization in the next week. That typically doesn't happen. It's not helpful for organizations. It's stressful for everybody, and it's not what we're about in this program.
So we want to make sure that we can introduce Amy Chu. Raise your hand, Amy. She's our third part of our team here for CYD.
She's in her 4th week, and we'll be, like Keita and I will be supporting about 1/3 of the portfolio. So you'll have a specific point of contact once we get up and moving, and then certainly once your application is in, as we move into the site visit or other questions. The site visits length, there's a question about the length. They're typically not more than 2 hours long. And they're really about seeing the process. We don't necessarily want to visit a program for a performance or a concert. We want to, panelists are the best advocates for programs when they can observe the process and then communicate what that process is like. They'll really be focusing on what the experience of young people is. And it's hard to extrapolate that from seeing a performance. So we try not to keep it less than 2 hours. Sometimes if there's a lot of community partners and other folks who come in the room, you know, it can go on a little longer, but 90 minutes is typical. and we go from there, because there's often travel involved too. So when we go visit a program out west, it can be a whole day long process, but we are happy to do it. Anything else before we part ways for now? All right, well, thank you again. We will make sure we share out this presentation and then also the recording, and probably send along a few other resources for you to access in terms of logic models and the resource that is Julia Gittleman, and a few other things as well. So thanks for taking some time, and look forward to talking with everybody about their applications in the next 4 months. Take care.